Since the dawn of time, human beings have searched for the perfect partner. The idea of a soul-deep connection, of a love that completes us, has been at the heart of countless stories, myths, and philosophies. But what if I told you that many of the relationships we consider ideal are actually reflections of our deepest inner conflicts? Carl Jung, one of the greatest explorers of the human psyche, left us a powerful warning. We don't choose our partners randomly. More often than not, we choose, unconsciously, those who mirror our unresolved wounds, our hidden fears, and even the darkest corners of our shadow. Think about it. Have you ever wondered why you keep ending up in relationships that leave you feeling unfulfilled, confused, or even trapped? Why, despite your best intentions, do you find yourself emotionally drained? If you've ever had the sense that you're with the wrong person, it may not be fate's mistake, but rather an invitation to look within yourself. Jung believed that the unconscious plays a crucial role in our relationships. While our conscious mind seeks safety, comfort, and companionship, our unconscious operates on an entirely different level. It seeks wholeness, and in its quest to make us whole, it draws us toward people who, instead of healing us, often intensify our pain. That's why the first step in knowing whether you're with the wrong person is not to look outward, but inward. Examine the emotions that surface in your relationship. Do you constantly feel insecure? Do you find yourself fighting for love or validation? Do you have an unshakable feeling that something isn't right, even if you can't quite put it into words? These are not random feelings. They are the language of your unconscious, trying to speak to you. Jung saw relationships as mirrors of our inner world. The qualities we admire in others are often parts of ourselves that we've repressed or left undeveloped. But the same is true for the traits that irritate, wound, or anger us. The things that disturb us most about our partners are often projections of our own shadows, the parts of ourselves we've denied or disowned. So when you feel like you're with the wrong person, the most important question to ask yourself is, what part of me is being reflected in this relationship? What patterns am I repeating? What lessons am I refusing to learn? It's hard to accept, but many of our relationships are not the result of bad luck. They are the outcome of unconscious programming that leads us to seek out the familiar, even when the familiar is painful. This is where Jung's concept of the shadow comes into play. The shadow is everything we've repressed, denied, or avoided in ourselves. And ironically, the person we fall in love with is often the one who embodies what we've rejected within us. If you grew up feeling deeply insecure, you might be drawn to someone who constantly makes you question your worth. If you experienced childhood neglect or felt invisible, you might find yourself in relationships where you have to fight to be seen. The shadow doesn't choose healthy relationships. It chooses what feels familiar, what confirms our deepest, often painful beliefs about love and about ourselves. That's why, when you feel like you're with the wrong person, it's not just about them. It's about the part of you that brought you to that experience. But here lies the key. Just because a relationship reflects your wounds doesn't mean you're doomed to suffer. On the contrary, Jung saw difficult relationships as opportunities for transformation. When you have the courage to face what your relationship is revealing about you, you gain the power to change your story. The problem is that most people don't want to look within. They'd rather blame the other person, hold on to the hope that love will fix everything, or believe that with enough patience, things will get better. But Jung warned that there can be no evolution without awareness. Until you become conscious of the patterns that drive you to choose unfulfilling relationships, you'll keep repeating them. And this is when everything starts to make sense. It's no coincidence that you feel frustrated, exhausted, or even lost in your relationship. It's not about luck or destiny. It's about patterns that have been silently operating in your unconscious for a long time. Jung didn't speak of the unconscious as some abstract idea. He saw it as a living force that influences every part of our lives, especially our relationships. And one thing the unconscious does remarkably well is draw us back again and again into the same experiences until we learn. If you feel like you're with the wrong person, there's a deeper reason behind that. Perhaps your relationship isn't based on authenticity, but on need. Jung taught that when a person hasn't developed their own sense of identity, they'll seek completion through another. They'll be drawn to someone who fills their emotional gaps, who gives them the validation, safety, or sense of purpose they haven't found within themselves. This is one of love's most dangerous traps. True love isn't about finding someone who completes you. It's about sharing your completeness with another. But most people don't enter relationships from a place of wholeness. They come from a place of lack. And when two people with unresolved wounds come together, what they create is not love, it's dependency. That's where the real problems begin. In a relationship built on need, imbalance is inevitable. One person will always feel like they're giving more than they're receiving. The other will feel like nothing is ever enough. Power struggles emerge. Subtle, or not so subtle, manipulation takes root. And soon, both people are trapped in a cycle of unmet expectations. This doesn't mean all relationships are doomed to fail, but it does mean that many don't start from a healthy place. And the only way to break free from these destructive patterns is to do what Jung urged us to do. Look within. If you feel like you're with the wrong person, ask yourself, am I with them because I love them or because I need them? Does this relationship help me grow or does it keep me stuck? Do I feel free in this connection or trapped in a dynamic I can't escape? Love should not feel like a constant battle. Yes, every relationship has its challenges, but there's a big difference between facing challenges together and feeling like you're fighting alone just to make things work. When you're with the wrong person, the relationship consumes more energy than it gives. It wears you down, it drains you, and worst of all, deep down, you already know it. Carl Jung believed that intuition was one of the most powerful forms of communication between the conscious and the unconscious mind. But the reality is that most people have been trained to ignore it. They've been conditioned to believe they must always give it another chance, that every relationship requires effort, and that love conquers all. But here's the truth. If you have to convince yourself that a relationship is right, then it probably isn't. You don't need to come up with reasons to justify true love, because when you're with the right person, things just flow. That doesn't mean everything will be perfect or free of challenges. But healthy love feels light, natural, and uplifting. It doesn't keep you in a constant state of anxiety, self-doubt, or emotional exhaustion. When you're with the wrong person, you feel it in every corner of your being. You see it in the way you argue, in the lack of deep connection, in the unmet expectations, and in the way you slowly lose your sense of self just to try and make the relationship work. And this is where so many people get stuck. They keep telling themselves that things will get better, that time will fix everything. But Jung would argue that change doesn't happen without awareness. And if you keep ignoring the signs, the only thing that will truly change is your ability to tolerate what you should have never been tolerating in the first place. It's hard, so hard, to accept that someone you love might not be right for you. It's painful to let go of the idea of what could have been. But here's the most important part. Holding on to something that isn't right for you only takes you further away from what truly is. When you choose to release what no longer serves your soul, something truly magical begins to happen. Not immediately, because letting go is also a process of grief. But slowly, quietly, you begin to feel lighter. Your energy starts to return. Your mind becomes clearer. You realize that you were living in denial, trying to justify something that deep down you knew wasn't working. And in that moment of clarity, you finally understand what Jung was trying to teach all along. The most radical act of self-love is choosing yourself. You cannot build a healthy relationship with someone else if you haven't first built one with yourself. You can't expect another person to fill the voids that only you have the power to heal. And you absolutely cannot stay in a relationship that is hurting you just because you're afraid of what comes next. The wrong person will make you question your worth, your essence, and your inner knowing. The right person will inspire you to become the best version of yourself without ever asking you to lose your authenticity in the process. If you feel that you're in the wrong relationship, trust what you feel. You don't need more proof. You don't need more excuses. You don't need more time to see if anything changes. The real question is, how much longer are you going to ignore what you already know deep inside? The answer to that question might just be the beginning of the greatest transformation of your life. When you're stuck in a relationship that feels off, that feels misaligned, it's so easy to get lost in your own confusion. Sometimes you convince yourself that it's all in your head, that maybe you're just being dramatic, that if you try a little harder, if you give it a little more time, maybe things will finally shift. But deep down, you know something's not right. And that feeling, that persistent, unshakable feeling, isn't a fantasy. It's your unconscious mind screaming at you, trying to tell you a truth you may not yet be ready to face. Jung taught us that the unconscious is always trying to communicate with us, even if we don't immediately understand the message. Maybe lately, you've felt more exhausted than usual. Maybe it's been hard to sleep. Your dreams have turned restless, or there's this strange emptiness growing inside you. These aren't random sensations. They're signals, manifestations of an inner conflict, a quiet part of you that recognizes something fundamental in your relationship is no longer aligned with your true self. When you're with the wrong person, you slowly begin to lose your essence. Without realizing it, you start silencing your thoughts, hiding your desires, toning down your personality, just to avoid conflict or to keep the relationship going. But that's the trap. The moment you feel like you have to change who you are just to be accepted, you've already stepped away from real love. Because real love doesn't require you to leave parts of yourself behind. Real love welcomes all of you. Maybe you've caught yourself justifying behaviors that, if they happen to a close friend, you'd immediately see as unacceptable. Maybe you've told yourself that no one is perfect, that all couples go through problems, or that this is just how relationships work. But there's a difference between the natural challenges that every relationship faces and the emotional erosion that wears you down, little by little. If a relationship makes you feel small instead of expansive, if it brings more anxiety than peace, if it leads you to question your own worth over and over again, then it's time to ask yourself the hard question: is this the relationship I really want for my life? Jung believed the unconscious never stays silent. If you ignore its messages, they begin to show up more intensely through anxiety, sudden sadness, repeating conflicts, or even psychosomatic illness. The body always finds a way to express what the mind is trying to suppress. One of the clearest signs that you're in the wrong relationship is that you feel stuck in a cycle of emotional exhaustion rather than being in a space of growth and connection. The deeper problem is that many people have been taught to settle for incomplete love. They've grown up with the idea that love means sacrifice, that suffering is part of the deal, that if it doesn't hurt, it can't be real. But Jung would remind us that love isn't meant to be a battleground. It isn't supposed to be a place where you're constantly fighting to be seen, heard, or valued. Real love is a safe space, a place where you can be entirely yourself without fear, where you can grow without being held back, where your partner doesn't become an emotional weight, but rather a fellow traveler walking beside you. And yes, it's normal to be afraid of letting go. We cling to what we know, even when it's hurting us, even when deep down we're aware it's not right. The familiar often feels safer than the unknown. But this is exactly where Jung's concept of transformation comes in. He believed that true growth can only happen when we dare to release what no longer belongs to us. And even though letting go might be terrifying, it's also the very first step toward finding the life and the love that will truly fulfill us. If you've ever felt like your relationship is holding you back instead of lifting you up, if it leaves you drained instead of inspired, if it makes you doubt your path instead of giving you strength, then that's not something you should ignore. You don't need one more excuse, one more failed attempt, or one last justification. The real question isn't, can this relationship be fixed? The real question is, does this relationship allow me to be who I really am? And when you choose to listen to yourself, when you finally give more importance to your well-being than to the comfort of what's familiar, that's when you begin to reclaim your power. Because love, when it's real, doesn't dim your light. It helps you shine even brighter. Staying in a relationship that doesn't serve you causes something inside you to slowly shut down. At first, it's just a vague discomfort, a strange feeling you can't quite name. Then comes the emptiness, even when the other person is physically there. Eventually, that discomfort turns into dissatisfaction, into a deep internal conflict between what you genuinely feel and what you keep trying to rationalize. But the most dangerous part of all isn't the relationship itself. It's the silent, subtle process of self-abandonment that begins to unfold. Jung taught us that human beings have an innate need to find balance between their inner world and the face they show to the outside world. And yet, in the name of love, many people end up sacrificing their authenticity. They begin to silence their real thoughts, shrink their needs, and hide their truths, just to avoid upsetting the other person. And the tragedy is, this rarely happens all at once. It's slow, it's barely noticeable, like a candle that quietly burns down until one day, without realizing, it's gone out completely. You keep telling yourself this is normal, that all relationships have their tough moments, that all you need is patience. But there's a big difference between facing challenges together and losing yourself along the way. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, is this love, or is it just the fear of being alone? Jung would say that when a relationship demands you to suppress your intuition, when it asks you to silence your inner voice and disregard what you truly feel. It's no longer love, but a prison disguised as companionship. And that's the core issue. We often confuse love with habit, with loyalty, with the belief that just because we've invested years, energy, and effort into someone, we owe it to ourselves to stay. But time spent in something that doesn't nourish you is not a reason to remain. The only real reason to stay in a relationship is if it helps you grow, if it inspires you, if it supports you without suffocating you, if it allows you to be yourself without constantly asking you to become someone you're not. Maybe you've found yourself justifying behaviors that, in any other context, you would never accept. Maybe you've taught yourself to minimize the pain, saying, "It's not that bad," or "Nobody's perfect," or "Everyone has flaws." But the problem isn't really the other person. It's that you've learned to tolerate what should never have been tolerable in the first place. When you're in a relationship where you constantly feel like you have to fight to be understood, when it seems like you're giving more than you're receiving, when the connection feels more like a struggle than a natural flow, that's a clear sign that something is not in alignment with your true essence. The unconscious mind is wise. It finds subtle ways to speak to you when your conscious mind refuses to listen. It communicates through exhaustion, through that underlying sense of dissatisfaction, through that quiet sadness you can't explain, especially when, from the outside, everything seems fine. You can't lie to yourself forever. You can rationalize, justify, come up with excuses, but your unconscious always knows, and if you continue to ignore it, it will make itself heard in louder, more painful ways. If you feel that something doesn't sit right in your relationship, trust that feeling. You don't need undeniable proof. You don't need a dramatic event to validate your intuition. Jung would tell us that the simple fact of feeling resistance inside you, of feeling trapped, is already enough of a sign. That alone is your inner voice, whispering that maybe this isn't the right place for you. And yet, the hardest question arises. What do you do when you realize you're with the wrong person? Because knowing it is one thing, but doing something about it, that's an entirely different story. And this is where most people freeze. It's the fear of change, of emptiness, of not knowing what comes next, that keeps so many tied to relationships that haven't felt like home in a long time. The mind plays cruel tricks at this stage. It whispers that maybe this is as good as it gets, that you just need to try harder, one more time, that if you walk away, you'll regret it forever. But Jung taught that life is a constant process of transformation, and every time you resist change, you move further away from your own evolution. Letting go isn't easy, but holding on to something that's harming you only prolongs your pain. So the real question is not whether the other person will change, or if things might get better, or if someday everything could be different. The real question is, do I want to keep living like this? Because in the end, it's not about the other person. It's about you, about how much you value your peace, about how much respect you have for your own feelings, about how deeply you trust that there is something better for you out there. The greatest act of self-love is having the courage to let go of what no longer serves you, even if a part of you still clings to it. Because love, when it's real, doesn't feel like an inner war. It doesn't leave you drained or make you question your worth. When you're with the right person, you just know, not because everything is perfect, but because peace has taken the place of struggle. That's where Jung's most powerful lesson lies. The most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. Don't sacrifice that relationship out of fear of being alone. Don't hold on to something just because it once meant something, or because you're scared of letting go. Because only when you're at peace with who you are will you attract someone who reflects that peace, someone who adds calm to your life, not chaos. If you feel deep down that you're with the wrong person, then you already have the answer. The only question left is, how much longer are you going to ignore it? And at that point, it all comes down to a choice. Not about the other person, not about what could have been, not about the time you've invested. It's about you, about how willing you are to listen to yourself, about how much you value your peace of mind, about how deeply you trust that you deserve more than a relationship rooted in struggle, sacrifice, and uncertainty. Carl Jung taught us that life doesn't push us into suffering out of cruelty or randomness. Every experience we go through, even the pain of being with the wrong person, serves a deeper purpose. That purpose is to awaken us, but awakening doesn't happen just by knowing the truth. It happens when we take action. It happens when we stop lying to ourselves, when we face fear directly and choose authenticity over comfort. It's easy to fall into the trap of believing that love must involve suffering, that we have to endure it, that happiness will come eventually if we're just patient enough. But real happiness doesn't lie in waiting for something outside of us to change. It lies in changing ourselves, in making the decision that we deserve better, in trusting that there is a kind of love out there that won't make us question our worth, that won't make us beg for affection or validation, that won't leave us wondering if we're enough. If there's one thing you take away from all of this, let it be this: you don't need any more reasons to leave a place where you are not happy. You don't need more proof. You don't need more excuses. You don't need to give it one last try just to make sure. The only evidence you ever really need is how you feel. Because when something is right for you, you feel it. In your mind, in your body, in your spirit. And when something isn't, you feel that too, even if it's painful to admit. True love doesn't ask you to choose between being yourself and being with someone. It doesn't make you fight for visibility, or struggle to be heard, or beg to be understood. It doesn't leave you questioning every single day if you're in the right place or with the right person. Healthy love is a space of calm, not a source of anxiety. It allows you to breathe deeply, not walk on eggshells. It lifts you rather than weighs you down. And now it's your turn. It doesn't matter how many times you ignored the signs in the past. It doesn't matter how long you stayed in a relationship that didn't nurture your soul. The only thing that matters is what you choose to do now, in this moment. Because every single day, you have the chance to choose yourself, to break the patterns that have kept you stuck, to walk away from what hurts, to build a life where love isn't something you have to survive. It's something that feels like home, a refuge, not a war zone. And if this message resonated with you, if something deep within you stirred while listening, then maybe it's because your soul has been waiting for this very reminder. Maybe it's not just about you. Maybe you know someone else who's silently struggling in a relationship that drains them more than it nurtures them. If so, don't keep this to yourself. Share it. Pass it on. You never know whose life you might be saving just by offering them a moment of clarity, a moment of reflection, a moment of truth. There are countless people out there stuck in relationships that slowly dim their light, relationships that suffocate their essence, that chip away at their joy, that make them feel smaller, unworthy, or invisible. They stay because they're afraid of loneliness, afraid of change, afraid of starting over. But sometimes staying is the real danger. Sometimes holding on is far more painful than letting go. That's why this message is so important. Because someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to be reminded that they're not crazy for wanting more, that their peace matters, that love should never feel like a prison, that it's okay to walk away from what no longer aligns with their soul. So I invite you to pause for a moment and reflect. What part of this message touched your heart the most? Was there a sentence, a feeling, a truth that shook something loose inside you? If there was, don't keep it bottled up. Leave a comment, let it out, speak your truth. Because your story, yes, your story, might be the exact story someone else needs to hear right now to realize that they too are not alone, that there's hope, that change is possible. And ask yourself honestly, what decision are you ready to make today to reclaim your peace? What's one boundary you're finally willing to set? One pattern you're ready to break? One step you're brave enough to take? Even if your voice trembles and your heart races. Because the truth is, deep down, we always know when a relationship isn't right for us. We feel it in our bodies, in the way we lose sleep, in the way we walk on eggshells, in the way we silence ourselves just to keep the peace, in the way we second-guess our worth. And even though we try to convince ourselves to stay, the truth doesn't go away. It just gets louder and heavier until we finally have no choice but to listen. So what is your truth trying to tell you right now? Remember, your story has power, more than you think. Sharing your experience can inspire others who are walking the same path you once walked, scared, confused, unsure. You could be the voice they need to find their own strength. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the upcoming videos. Together, we'll keep diving deep into the human mind, into relationships, and into the journey of creating a life that feels real, not perfect, but authentic, not easy, but aligned. A life where peace isn't a luxury, but a daily choice. Transformation begins with you. So don't wait any longer to choose yourself. We'll meet again in the next video.